Let's turn our attention then to the Galway senior footballers after a disappointing 2021, to say the least. Just 2 wins in the entirety of 2021. In fact, just 2 wins now since the start of the very first lockdown. And the only team they've beaten is Roscommon, once in the league and once in the Connacht Senior Football Championship. Disappointing times for Galway. They were relegated to Division 2, having been beaten by Monaghan in that playoff game. A game that they were in front, they were looking good, but failed to close the game out, and Monaghan managed to beat them and relegate Galway to Division 2. The Connacht Senior Football Championship started on a more positive note, beating Roscommon in the semi-finals, but then having looked comfortable against Mayo at half-time, having showed the brilliance of the likes of Shane Walsh and Paul Conroy, they were disappointing in the second half, and they were overpowered, beaten, and didn't even score from play. A disappointing year for Galway. Where did it all go wrong? How did it go wrong? And in today's video, in today's podcast, I was delighted to speak with Paul Shaughnessy of the Backdoor GAA podcast. We run through all things Galway ahead of the upcoming 2022 Intercounty GAA season. We run through the future of Paraic Joyce, the importance of Shane Walsh, some potential young players to come through the Galway ranks as well. How might they get on in Division 2, and some general predictions as well. We will also be discussing the hurlers, but that will be out on Friday, so stay tuned for that. And leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this content. More season previews, more reviews, podcast, match reactions to come soon as well. So if you do enjoy this content, let me know down in the comments below what you think will happen with the Galway footballers in 2022, and let's get straight into it.
Well, nowadays you got to have that because people nowadays.
Before we get straight into the podcast, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Declan Kirby GAA Star. Declan Kirby GAA Star Championship Journey. It's a series of GAA team children's books written by primary school teacher and GAA coach Michael Egan. You can check it out in the link in the description down below, of course, as well. Follow the trials and tribulations of Declan Kirby and his team at Smithgreen Gaelic Football Club, recently formed but promising GAA team. The book is now available in Easons and all good bookshops, so check it out in the description down below, and let's get straight into it. Okay, so I'm here now with Paul Shaughnessy of Backdoor GAA. We're going to be previewing the Galway senior footballers and the Galway senior hurlers as well ahead of the upcoming 2022 National Football League and National Hurling League Championships, and of course the All-Ireland Football Championship and the All-Ireland Hurling Championship as well. I suppose first of all, how's things, Paul? We were chatting off air there anyway. You're keeping well?
Yeah, all good now. And I suppose it's a nice time of year when you're just kind of looking at the different counties and you're hearing all the different rumors of who's in the panels, who's not, who's left, who's gone traveling. And I suppose, as particularly in football this year, there's a lot of new managers as well, and particularly a lot of ex-players that I suppose my generation and probably your own generation would have grown up watching as footballers and now putting their hand into management. So that's going to be fascinating to see as well.
Yeah, and you're enjoying the club action anyways. I know, like, on your own podcast, you're covering a lot of the club action and whatnot, so you're enjoying that anyways.
Yeah, no, the club has been particularly the football this year. It's still wide open. There's a lot of big guns that have been knocked out in their own counties. When you take Kerfin, Crossmaglen, and Dr. Crokes only defeating Clarny Legion to stay up in senior football. So, like, it's definitely still wide open. You're looking at Connacht, Knockmore, and Port Pierce's. Munster is particularly wide open as well. But I just think it's disappointing this weekend. Kilcoo are playing Glen. It's not being televised, and it's probably the pick of the games this weekend. And if you look at the hurling, then Clop Balacalla have been the story of the championship, really.
Yeah, like, I suppose, like, it's probably the game of the year, that game, Waddy Graham's Glen and Kilcoo. And yeah, it's, I think, at the third game on TG Cahir, it's not being shown live, which is kind of crazy, really. What were your thoughts on the Mount Bellew, Mylock and Padraig Pearce's game, and I suppose the controversy at the end of the game? As I was saying to you off air, I was away at the weekend, so I didn't catch it, didn't see the game, but what were your thoughts, I suppose, on some of the controversy that happened there?
Yeah, I think it's been widely kind of talked about over social media and different platforms this weekend. Like, it's obviously extremely disappointing from Montpellier. I'm sure they have been disappointed of maybe how they did react, but like the commitment they put in as well all year to train like that, and like it's obviously a bad decision by Jerome Henry towards the end of the game. Barry McHugh clearly catches the mark, and people have talked about, was Michael Daly inside the 45 he wasn't. He was outside the 45, played the ball in. And then nearly Matthew Barrett is kind of fouled after that. And then Porrick Pierce's go down and they get the winner. And I think Montpellier nearly feel themselves. There's a lot of decisions, not just that one that was highlighted. But yeah, it's extremely disappointing the way they reacted. Like I've refed underage games and stuff like, and for a referee to feel kind of nearly threatened because there are 5 or 6 players around him. A player pushes him in the back at the end of the game. I think it's something we have to change in the GAA. There's just a culture where teams can nearly, well, I know in Montpellier's favour, like they will look back and it kind of was a refereeing decision, but I think teams are too quick sometimes to call the referee out and just kind of with the easy option of blaming the ref. And it's just something we have to change. Like it'd be interesting, will they get fined? Like, will there be a punishment, or is it just going to be a cop out by the GAA and maybe ban Montpellier when there's no club action happening? And that could easily happen as well. But overall for Montpellier, it's a massively successful year. They've ended the hoodoo and finally got over the line, win the county title. They won the league as well. That was the first game between league and championship they lost all year. So they're still going to look back at it with a lot of positives and a lot of players that will probably be in Galway this year as well.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose it was the first year for a lot of the players that they were playing in the Connacht Club Senior Football Championship. So definitely a lot of positives to take. And I suppose moving on to a more positive note as well, like I'd imagine you're excited enough to see the intercounty action coming back next year. Obviously, I suppose last year we didn't have too much to wait. Obviously there was a bit of a layoff, but we basically had 2 back-to-back county seasons with no club season in between. So I'd say you're happy enough anyway to get back to intercounty action.
Yeah, I think it makes it a lot more excitement this year now. Like, because people are fascinated to see what's the reaction going to be like Dublin in particularly, because intercounty was becoming a bit stale, and when Tyrone got over the line, and you see like who Kerry have added, the players they've added to their panel, the management team they have in place, Mayo's youthfulness, I definitely think it's a lot more open this year than it has been in previous years. A lot more of a condensed championship as well this year. Like I think we're going to see championship in April, the All-Ireland finals in July, league action at the end of January, which probably won't be pretty between some teams at the start. But I think gradually as the league goes on, it will get better. But like, I'm excited in one way, Aaron, but I'm still disappointed that I don't want to go into it too much now and sound like a broken record, but I'm just disappointed that we've kind of kept the provincial championships and we're sticking with the old system. I know the Tailteann Cup is in and like that's great for the 3 and 4 teams, but from the bottom teams of Division 2 to Division 1, I still think there's a gap as bigger as it's ever been.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, all right. Like I think there was a lot of discussion, all right, like throughout the winter about different provincial changes and different things happening. And I suppose the fact that you have pre-season tournaments coming back in now as well, which is kind of interesting in many ways. Like you can tell the provincial councils just probably have too much of a pull, and realistically, like even if they were to change something, it's probably unlikely that they'd ever get rid of the provincial championships because they just seem to have too much of a big pull.
Yeah, no, I think as it was suggested though, to play it as a pre-season competition, the provincials, I think that would have been something, because it still would have been value. Even Niall Morgan was talking and he said if he won an Ulster Championship in January or February or whenever it'd be, it'd mean as much to him as the one they won against Monaghan this year. And I still think a lot of players do value, like the provincial championships are never going to go. We have to face that. But if we played as pre-seasons, there still would be a value to it. But I just think there's an uneven balance, and I think for the commitment players are given, like intercounty, yourself is nearly like a full-time job at this stage, and like no disrespect to some of the weaker counties, I know they're going to have a Tailteann Cup, but there's teams realistically who are going to maybe say lose a Connacht Championship game, go into the Tailteann Cup, lose that game, and that's 2 games, and that's a year plus 7 league games and maybe plus 1 or 2 preseason games. Like it's just, I feel personally like for the weaker counties, it doesn't add up when you're committing that much, and championship is the be all and end all, and it's two games. I just think if you look at that in any other sport, the there's a lot more training going on than games, and I think it's mad, really.
Yeah, like I suppose it depends how they market the Taltine Cup as well and the layout of it or whatever way they do it. Because I think, yeah, like 2 games is just a bit ridiculous. Like maybe if they were to do the Taltine Cup and have group stages or something like that and have a round robin system, maybe of, 2 groups of 5 or something like that. At least maybe that would be a bit better. But like what you said there, like having 2 games in total for a lot of the lesser counties, like it's very hard to improve. Like when you only have 2 games, like.
Yeah, and for like even Tony McEntee was talking in the media, and he says like it's nearly hard for him to talk Sligo players in. Like the Talton Cup will help somewhat for more players in Sligo or Leitrim or wherever or Wicklow to come back in, but it's just hard for managers, and I think you'll even see it in the Talton Cup. Like there's still, I feel there's going to be, say, the 2 teams relegated from Division 2. If they don't reach provincial finals, they're going to be thrown into the Talton Cup. So like there still could be a step between them teams and the rest, but it's something we're getting there. There's a lot of talk that there's so many positives out of Congress. It's going to be again in February. So if there is going to be change, I think it's time for change, because you've even seen yourself in the hurling. I think it's working fantastic. Like the Joe McDonough, the Christy Ring, like the rise of Mayo hurlers, Kildare hurlers. Like we're seeing more teams like that come up in the hurling, and it's benefiting them. And if they are good enough to play the big teams, they'll get there. But I think it's just mad for 32 teams in total to be playing like in the provincial and then into an All Ireland series.
Yeah, and I suppose moving on from that, then looking at the Galway footballers ahead of 2022, like how would you look back on the 2021 league and championship for Galway now? Like obviously relegated in that game against Monaghan down to Division 2 and beaten against Mayo in the Connacht final. So how would you look back on it all now?
I think if you're being realistic, it was a disappointing season. Possibly got off to the worst start you could last year in the league. Kerry just humiliated them down there. There's positives then to take against Dublin. And then up to Monaghan, they were in such a good position and then they let it slip. So that was disappointing again. Roscommon thrown into that as well. And then Roscommon in the championship, there was positives to take. And first half performance against Mayo, a lot of Galway fans were excited, but just the way they fell out, I don't think they scored from play in that second half. So that's the most disappointing thing. And I don't want to feel like I'm going back too far, but I think the first lockdown we got is like it's really affected this team, because they're absolutely flying it before that lockdown was coming. Like they still lost to Kerry down in Kerry, but the way they competed with them down there, I think they were nearly first or second in the league at that time, and they were flying it. And even when they came back after that, the first game was against Mayo, and they got hammered in Tuam Stadium. So, but I think this year it'll help a small bit. It feels like kind of a first kind of proper season that they're going to get the run of things. But like I'm hearing different things of there's lads in there and there's maybe 1 or 2 that mightn't commit. I just hope that they can get everyone to commit, because like last year I think there was something like 7 players at the start of the year who didn't commit. Michael Daly obviously being the most noticeable one who didn't commit. So if they can get a clear run at it, it's definitely going to help.
Yeah, I was going to say that to you as well, because like since that lockdown in particular, I remember watching Galway in that game against Tyrone, and he absolutely blew them away. And I thought, Jesus, like Galway are looking pretty good. Like, and at the time, obviously Dublin are going for 6 in a row. I was thinking maybe Galway might be the closest. And then the lockdown happens and you just never really found that form. Like, what do you put it down to? Do you think I know there was a few injuries in there with Damien Comer and Shane Walsh, but do you think it was just that long layoff and things change, or what do you put it down to?
I don't know, was it a long layoff, or maybe they just went hell for leather from the start at it and just really gave their best? Yeah, but they just haven't really came back. And I think in one sense we were kind of starting to realise down here, like there's been a massive reliance over Shane Walsh, and it's just about, and before that lockdown there was other players stepping up and there was a real kind of feel good factor. Yeah, and you mentioned the Tyrone game that day, they absolutely outclassed them, and now look at what Tyrone went on to do. So it's really about getting a bit of consistency back, and I just feel playing more as a team. They showed it against Roscommon when it wasn't a pretty day, that they could gel well together as a team. But I just think against Mayo that day, like conditioning wise, and I just felt in that second half like they'd probably look back at themselves just disappointing really to like fade away against your neighbours like that.
Yeah, because I was going to say that as well, in particular in that Mayo game. Like in the first half, you were doing everything right. Like it looked almost close to the Galway pre-lockdown, and then in the second half, you just completely fell away. So do you think it was conditioning wise, or do you think there was anything tactically there, or do you think maybe Mayo were just maybe Mayo are just ahead of Galway at the moment, and maybe that's just facts?
I think Mayo are definitely ahead of Galway, but I think conditioning wise, there was a massive difference between the two. Like when you're seeing Oshie Mullen, Tommy Conroy, Ryan O'Donoghue, Owen McLaughlin, and these lads are 21, 22, 23, like, and they're in peak condition, and you're just looking at some of the Galway players, and like they will gradually get to that level. But I think that was one thing. I think it's a thing Galway might have worked on massively. This preseason now is really getting this, because you have to get your conditioning up there to compete. There's no question. Like if you don't have the conditioning, like conditioning has to go with the football side of things. But I think that's what they'll be looking to get to. And like it, Mayo are standard players now in Connacht. Like before Paraic Joyce came in, we had the upper hand on them. We were beating them most years in the Connacht Championship, but the last few years now we struggled, and it's up to Galway to get to that level now. Against Mayo.
Yeah, and when you were beaten by Mayo, I seen some, I suppose, rumor mills online and people chatting maybe about, is Paraic Joyce still the right man? Is he still the man to lead Galway? I suppose after having been beaten against Mayo in the Connacht final the year previous. Obviously, it's been really tough for him, been tough for all managers during COVID. Like, but what do you think? Is he still the right man to lead Galway forward in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, no, I definitely think Porrick deserves a good run at it. One thing I'm going to say here is I think there's a kind of soccer thing creeping into the GA where it's managers are being called out to be sacked straight away, and I just don't like the way that is, and where managers are getting more blame than the players. I think it's a time for a lot of these Galway footballers to stand up and be counted if they want to push on. Like there's Shane Walsh, Eamon Brannigan, Johnny Heaney, Damien Comer. Like they're all in, Paul Conroy, they're all in their peak now, like mid-20s. Paul Conroy has been a great servant for Galway football and is still going to continue to. There's another few years left in him, but I just think it's time for a lot of the players to stand up. And it obviously hasn't been easy. I don't think last year the group format in the league helped Galway, because they were trying to kind of look at a lot of the younger players in the team and try and bring them on. So I think this year's 7 league games can stand massively to Galway if they can really make them count. But yeah, no, I think Porrick deserves his chance now, and I think this year is going to be very important for him. I think people in Galway want to see progress this year, and probably realistically want to see a Connacht title.
Yeah, I'd agree with you as well, actually, when you said about the, I suppose, soccer culture in some ways, and people, lambasting managers about being sacked and all the rest. You could probably say something similar even with Stephen Kenny and the Ireland national team, and everyone kind of going mad about trying to get rid of him and whatnot. But I suppose looking at Division 2, I mean, looking at the teams that are going to be in there for yourselves, obviously you haven't been relegated from Division 1. Like, it's going to be a tough division. Like, you've got Meath in there, obviously Derry have come up. Roscommon are usually a team who, will be thereabouts in Division 2. A lot of very good teams in there. So I'd imagine like it's not a given. I don't think that Galway just comes straight back up.
It's not a given, no, and it's about getting off to a great start, because I know Galway are looking at promotion, but they can't get into a bad run of form, and then it's about surviving to try and avoid the Tailteann Cup, or you're going to have to get to your provincial final, and that's an added pressure going into championship. A lot of teams aren't going to want. So I think that's why Division 2 is going to be so fascinating to see who will have to get to a provincial final or not. But yeah, you mentioned some of the teams there. Obviously, Derry are going to be a force to be reckoned with this year. They look back last year against Donegal with so many regrets, and the boost of another AFL star back in Anthony Towell is going to be massive for them. I think Derry, though, like if Glenn get the job done this weekend, like there's a lot of maybe Derry spine that'll be with Glenn, so I think they might struggle early on in the league, but Roy Gallagher will be trying to build a panel as well. Anthony Cunningham, like there's a lot of expectation with him this year, similar to Galway. He's on for another year. Wasn't sure would he, and then I think Meath are really going to be buoyed by winning the minor last year and the second half performance they give against Dublin, which is a lot of encouragement. And I think there's a lot of the managers in Division Two where they're kind of at the stage now where they have to get promoted, and there's a lot of pressure on them when you're looking at Andy McAtee, Paraic Joyce, Anthony Cunningham. Even like it'll be fascinating with the Cork footballers this year as well to see what they can kind of do. But yeah, no, I think it's going to be an extremely tight division as it always is, really.
Yeah, like a lot of big teams in there, a lot of teams with tradition of winning All Irelands and winning provincial titles, getting to provincial finals and whatnot. I think that's what makes it so fascinating. I'd imagine it's probably a great time as well to try out. You were mentioning there about last year or this year, I suppose, trying out young players and bringing through some of the under-20s who'd won the All Ireland the year previous. I'd imagine that would probably be something similar in 2022, like trying out some more of those under-20 players and whatnot, and trying to build, I suppose, a team for the future, I suppose, in that Division 2 campaign.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of new players in this year, all right, with Galway. One that a lot of people probably won't be over familiar with, and I reckon if he can stick with the right attitude, he's definitely going to be a player to look out for. It's Owen Gallagher is his name. He's originally from Antrim. He would have been on the Mike Cullen county championship winning team, and he's been a forward who's really been catching the eye. And I was wondering, like, what was the story? Where was he able to play with Galway because he's originally from Antrim, but he is now, and he's in the panel. And I think maybe we could do with a forward or two, and I think he can massively strengthen things. John Daly back at full fitness this year is going to be massive for Galway. Like he was a huge loss, and I expect maybe hopefully Michael Daly can come back into the squad. There's a few rumblings going around whether Peter Cook is going to commit this year, so he's definitely a player I think that Galway could do it, and it'd be huge to get him in. But yeah, as I mentioned, if they can get most of the players that have been thereabouts for the last few years committed, that'll be huge. As well, like Montpellier as well, Matthew Barrett at midfield is probably a player who's going to be in there. Midfield would be an interesting one because there's kind of hasn't been a consistent midfield partnership, shall we say. And maybe one or two of the younger Kerfin players could be called in as well. Dylan Canny was a player who played well in the club championship. He could be there. Ian Burke didn't commit last year and he didn't really feature with Kerfin, so maybe his. And then, as you mentioned, the under-20s, Johnny McGrath, the cornerback, is in there, James McLaughlin. So, no, I think that we're in, see a strong enough Galway squad this year, and it'll be fascinating to see how it emerges. But I think really, when you're looking at most intercounty squads, there's probably 40 or 50 in there at the moment. And probably even in the FPD games, we'll see players there who probably aren't going to be there for the league. It's just the way it kind of pans out.
Yeah, and you were mentioning earlier as well, like the over reliance in some ways on Shane Walsh, but I suppose I'd imagine keeping him fully fit as well, like because he probably is on his day like one of the best forwards in the country, and you've seen some glimpses of that in the first half against Mayo. So I'd imagine, wrapping him up in cotton wool or something like that to keep him fully fit, maybe not just for the league, but for the championship in particular, because he is a critical player, I'd imagine, for Paraic Joyce and Galway in 2022.
Yeah, you seen how high people rate Shane Walsh like across the country. It's just such a two-footed player. Maybe players we haven't seen in the game because it's really becoming a game of athletes, and it's just great to see that kind of talent. And he can do anything with a football. And seeing how high Port Joyce rated him when he made him, I suppose, take on that extra responsibility of captain, and he hasn't looked back since. He was a big blow last year. I know he stayed on in the Connacht final, but him and has himself and Pork O'Hara had to run in. I'm sure you've seen after he was carrying a shoulder injury for a lot of that game. He wasn't even able to play for his club for the majority of the intermediate championship. So yeah, no, as you said, keeping him fit, massive. Keeping Damien Comer's fit, and then trying to have the players to work around him. Like Paul Kelly was there last year; it's his first year, so you'll expect him to push on. Robert Finnerty was another player who went off injured last year as well. And then seeing the likes maybe Desi Kennedy push on again like that. Like there's there's definitely talent in there. I think for Galway, the thing really is just about getting a balance right between defence and attack.
And how do you see Division 2 playing out in that case? Like, do you see yourselves get up there, like maybe getting promoted, and who maybe do you see joining you in that case? Because as you said before, there's a pick of teams really you could go for, like you mentioned earlier, maybe Cork are going a run, maybe Derry are looking as good as ever. So how do you see it playing out?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a tight division. There's no question about that. But I think for Galway to push on, I think anything else they're not getting promoted will be an underachievement to start with straight away. So I definitely think it's in Division 2, there's a lot of teams that are close there. And there's teams as well that you don't expect to do much that will do much, like Offaly obviously are up, and there's going to be a great feel good factor in Offaly this year, especially with Tomás O'Shea and with them now as well. But to mention as well, Cian O'Neill coming in as coach for Galway, I think is a massive positive. Like all the counties he's worked with between football and hurling, I definitely think he's going to bring new ideas. Maybe he's going to have that outlook where Paraic Joyce goes from, how would you view us as a team before he came in? So like that's another positive for Galway. But yeah, no, I definitely think they'll be aiming at promotion, and I think if they can get off to a good start straight away and build that momentum game by game, they can definitely get promoted. But there's teams as well that you don't expect much from every year, and they hang in like the Clare footballers being probably the story of the league over the last few years as well.
Yeah, like, and even it wouldn't even surprise, like, although Down are favourites to get relegated, it wouldn't even surprise me if they managed to put a couple of performances together and cause a few surprises. That always seems to be the case in Division 2 and 3. You always seem to see a lot of shocks along the way. Looking at the Connacht Championship, I know obviously it's a long time away, but like looking at the draw, obviously getting Mayo in the first game, I mean that's a huge draw to get in the first match. Like you're looking at, I know Roscommon won a couple of Connacht titles there, but usually it's Galway or Mayo thereabouts over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So to get them on the first game, I mean that's a huge draw.
It's great. I actually think I think they couldn't have got them at a better time, and like there's great excitement, and it's probably for Galway and Mayo this year they're really going to have to start well from the league onwards, and it's like you mentioned Roscommon are there, and like don't get me wrong, they're there, but really feel between Galway and Mayo kind of opens up the championship for them, like whoever wins that game. And like there's been a great rivalry. I mentioned Galway struggled over Mayo the last few years, and Mayo's disappointment last year as well. So there's hurt there between kind of both sides. But yeah, no, it's a nice one to start it, a kind of quarter final, and like whoever loses that, it's a long run to Crow Park. So it's definitely probably the most eye-catching game in the championship across, I'd say, nearly all four championships to start with.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well because, well, hopefully, obviously, qualifiers are back. I know at this moment in time, anyway, they are going to have qualifiers next year. We'll see what the case is next year. But, like, I mean, you look back in the past, over the past couple of years, Mayo usually getting beaten in the opening round of the Connacht Championship, and Galway used beat them a couple of times, Roscommon beat them a couple of times. So probably is a great time to play them, get them in the first game, maybe where they're not fresh. Maybe they have a couple of injuries coming in after a heavy Division 1 campaign. So it might be a great time to play them.
Yeah, no, I think that's what they will feel, and Mayo might feel the same as well. Like, because it's going to be early in the year. I think that game is early enough in April, as far as I'm aware. So I think it's great though when you're looking at it this year. Like, I'd say players themselves found that break from league to championship very hard, where you're just training and there's not much matches. Like, I'd say if that game's in April now, there's probably only a 2-3 week break before championship, and that's ideal for players. But yeah, like there's a huge rivalry there. When Galway are playing Mayo, we don't get on, we don't like each other, and when the other team has gone further and the other team's out, they'll have no problem supporting each other. But that's just the way the rivalry is.
Yeah, I suppose I don't know if we can say the same about. I'm not too sure if the Meath fans are supporting Dublin when they get knocked out, but I do get what you mean. And looking at the overall big picture then in the All Ireland scene? Like, I mean, who would you see as the front runners, or who would you see as the favourites? I know it's a long time away and whatnot, and a lot's going to happen between then. A lot of trills and spills. I'm sure a lot of injuries, shocks, surprises, all the rest. But who would you see as the front runners or the favourites at this moment in time? Anyways, being 3-4 months away.
I think the least competitive championship this year is going to be the Munster, being totally honest. I think there's going to be an improvement in Cork, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to realistically touch Kerry. I think Keith Regan, like things he said in an interview, he speaks so highly of, and there needs to be big improvements in Cork. Like I hope I'm wrong, but I just feel what Kerry have added is massive. Like, you're looking at Jack Savage being called in, and he really shoot the lights out in the championship down in Kerry. Dylan Casey from Austin Stacks, he's a big boost for them as well. And I think for Kerry, getting Paddy Talley in as coach is perfect, because they've really kind of struggled defensively, and getting a man like Paddy Talley in here, he was up in Galway and he worked wonders and had a great system. I think then in Leinster, there'll obviously be a bite back with Dublin this year. In saying that as well, though, it doesn't look like Paul Mannion will be back this year, which I think is a big blow when you're seeing the performances. He's given Kevin McMenam another All-Ireland winner to leave the dressing room. And I think the management team Kildare got in, there's going to be a hard edge to them and Meath. So I think maybe Kildare and Meath will be the biggest challengers to Dublin. And then in Ulster, Tyrone are going to defend their crown, and they're going to try their best. I think they're going to push on, because we've seen the panel Tyrone have. But like, it's a lot harder for Tyrone to get to an All-Ireland final than it is for Kerry when you look at it. Donegal, obviously, will be hurting after last year. And I think one team I've kind of predicted, and I expect them to push on now this year, it'll be Armagh.
Yeah, no, like Armagh are looking good, to be fair, and they're one of them teams as well that you look at and you think, how have they not gotten to an Ulster final over the past couple of years? They've had a couple of tough fixtures and whatnot, but with the O'Neills in there and potentially Keane McConville and whatnot, like, they're looking good. And I think they played Donegal first time out in the Ulster Championship, and I suppose another year for them in Division 1 as well. So I'd imagine they'll, they're picking up experience all the time, and their players are getting more game time against the best. Like, they'll get to play Dublin this year and Kerry and Mayo. Like, they didn't get to play obviously any of them last year, unfortunately, because of the way the championship was structured. So no, I think that's a good call. I think they could probably be there or thereabouts maybe in Ulster.
Yeah, I think it's going to be extremely competitive in Ulster, and even Conor Turbot and Tiernan Kelly's leadership for Clonairin in the club championship has been really impressive. And I think they have the players there, as well. And like, as you mentioned there, another year in Division 1, another year for some of the younger players, and no better way to prepare for an Ulster Championship than playing Division 1 football. It'll be fascinating with Derry as well to see will there be a kick in them. I think they've play the winners of Tyrone and Fermanagh. Yeah. That'll be fascinating as well. But there's a lot of great games really to look forward to in Ulster. But yeah, I think it's open. Like, Dublin will still be thereabouts, and Tyrone. It's kind of really Tyrone, Dublin, Kerry, and I think they're the standout teams. And I think then, like, the gap it's not as big as it used to be, and it'll be fascinating to see Mayo as well. I know Oisin Mullen's gone out to Geelong, but that officially hasn't gone through yet. So don't be surprised if you see Oisin Mullen in a Mayo jersey yet this year either.
Yeah, like, you can never write Mayo off, I suppose. At least getting to the final, anyways. Like, I mean, you definitely.
They're just amazing when you think of it. Like, they got to an All-Ireland final this year, and in most eyes, they probably aren't in people's top 3 teams.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And they probably had one of their best forwards injured, for most of the season. Had a load of retirements. Their goalkeeper stepping away and whatnot. And they probably get a lot of stick maybe for losing All-Ireland finals, but when you look at it, they're still beating a lot of the teams that aren't also getting to All-Ireland finals. You know, there's only been, 2 All-Ireland winners in the past 7 years, obviously Dublin and Tyrone, Dublin winning 6 in a row. So Mayo probably get a lot of probably unfair stick maybe a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, and as you mentioned, Cillian O'Connor coming back this year, it definitely strengthens things further for them, and it will be thereabouts again this year. Like, I probably still do expect them to get to an All-Ireland semi-final, and anything can happen from there. So, and like they're developing a lot of youth there as well, like the likes of Tommy Conroy, Ryan O'Donoghue, Owen McLaughlin, Enda Hession. Them players aren't even in their mid-20s yet, so yeah, you have to take that into consideration. Like Jordan Flynn as well, so they definitely are bringing through them 1 or 2 players every year, which is it's what you need in any county, really.
Yeah, and is there any players even you think that are coming through? Like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be Galway players, but any kind of players to watch or ones to watch or anything like that you're seeing maybe coming through the under-20s that could potentially maybe spring a surprise or two, or maybe burst on the scene like we tend to see a few. Obviously, Oisin Mullen has obviously been one for Mayo. So is there any players that you can think of there?
I think for Kerry, I already mentioned him. I definitely think Dylan Casey is going to be a player to watch. I was really impressed with him when I seen him play, and Prost and Stacks. It was a dub. I don't know, would you be surprised to see him? But you'd have to think if a player like Paul Mannion isn't committing, Kevin McMillan stepped away, is finally going to be Kieran Archer's time to maybe break onto this Dublin team. And it's hard to, when you see how tight the margins are in the Ulster Championship, it's hard to know what many younger players break into the even Tyrone squad, because like seeing some of the players there who can't get their game times, like Ron O'Neill and these players who didn't even make the squad, like, so it's fascinating. In Galway, then, like in Galway, we've probably seen a lot of younger players that we're probably going to see more of this year. Like Tom O'Callaghan's been there for the under-20s. He might be a player. Carl Sweeney could be a player to break into the team, but I don't think Patrick Kelly could definitely be one. But I think a player as well, like that we're going to see for Galway this year, be Owen Finnerty from the Montpellier Minor team. He'd be about in his mid-20s now. To break into the squad. Yeah, like it's hard to know either as well, though, because when you're at that Division 1 level, not many managers will be prepared to take risks unless you're maybe a once in a generation player like a David Clifford or someone.
Yeah, that is very true. Like, and like what you said with Kieran Archer, like I would definitely expect him to be involved in the pre-season tournament at least. Anyways, like I think I know Dublin are quite strict a lot of the time in terms of the players that they bring through, and they like to keep players in development squads for a few years before they bring them through. Like, but yeah, you would expect maybe to see him get a bit more game time, especially with all the recent retirements and whatnot.